The rain hammered the windshield, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the world. Evelyn clutched the steering wheel, her knuckles white, as her mother's voice sliced through the storm. "You're no daughter of mine." Hours later, abandoned on a desolate stretch of highway, Evelyn stood shivering, her suitcase at her feet, the taillights of her family's car fading into the night. She was 18 then, a small-town girl from Willow Creek, Ohio, with dreams bigger than the cornfields that stretched endlessly around her. Her crime? Loving Clara, the girl with the laugh like wind chimes and eyes that held the promise of forever. Coming out to her devoutly religious parents had been a gamble, one she lost in the cruelest way. They'd driven her out of town, left her on the side of Route 23 with nothing but a backpack and a broken heart. "You can't be fixed," her father had said, his voice cold as the asphalt beneath her feet. Evelyn trudged through the rain, her boots sinking into the mud. Each step felt heavier, not just from the weight of her soaked clothes but from the betrayal that clung to her like damp air. She'd known her parents were conservative, but she'd hoped foolishly. She realized now that love would outweigh their dogma. Clara had wanted to come with her, to face the fallout together, but Evelyn had insisted she stay. "You have a future here," she'd whispered, kissing Clara's forehead in the secrecy of their favorite oak grove. "I'll find you again. I promise." By dawn, Evelyn reached a gas station, its flickering neon sign a beacon in the gray. The clerk, a grizzled man named Hank, took one look at her drenched figure and offered a cup of coffee and a blanket. "You look like you've been through hell, kid," he said, his voice gruff but kind. She didn't tell him the whole story, only that she needed a ride to Columbus. Hank didn't ask questions. He called a friend with a pickup truck, and by noon, Evelyn was on her way to a city she'd only seen on maps, leaving Willow Creek and Clara behind. Columbus was a shock to her system, loud, chaotic, alive. She found a women's shelter that didn't pry, and within days she was working odd jobs. Waitressing, cleaning houses, anything to keep her head above water. But every night, as she lay on the creaky cot in the shelter, Clara's face haunted her. They'd met in junior year, bonding over dog-eared library books and stolen glances in the school cafeteria. Clara had been the sun to Evelyn's storm, her quiet courage a balm to Evelyn's restless spirit. They'd planned a life together, college, a little apartment, maybe a dog. Now that dream felt like a cruel mirage. Evelyn wrote letters to Clara, pouring her heart onto cheap notebook paper. She mailed them to a mutual friend, hoping they'd reach her, but no replies came. Had Clara moved on? Had her parents found out and forced her to stop? The uncertainty gnawed at Evelyn, but she refused to let it break her. She enrolled in community college, studying graphic design, her fingers smudging charcoal as she sketched her pain into art. Her professors noticed her talent, and by her second year, she'd landed a part-time gig at a small design firm. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a lifeline in a world that had tried to drown her. Meanwhile, Clara remained in Willow Creek, trapped in a life that felt like a cage. Her parents, unlike Evelyn's, hadn't cast her out, but their disapproval was a silent weight. They'd found the love letters hidden in her dresser, and though they didn't disown her, they made it clear her phase was unacceptable. Clara was sent to church counseling, forced to attend youth group meetings where she was told to pray away her feelings. She smiled through it, her heart aching for Evelyn, but she didn't know where to find her. The letters stopped coming after a few months, and Clara feared the worst, that Evelyn had given up, or worse, that she'd been hurt. Clara threw herself into her studies, earning a scholarship to a small liberal arts college in Michigan. She told herself it was a fresh start, but every night she'd lie awake, wondering where Evelyn was. She'd drive past the oak grove where they'd shared their first kiss, the memory so vivid it felt like a wound. She wanted to search for Evelyn, but fear held her back, fear of rejection, fear of what her family would do if they found out she was still in love with a girl. Back in Columbus, Evelyn's life was taking shape. She moved into a tiny studio apartment, its walls covered in her sketches, portraits of Clara, mostly, her face captured in moments of joy and sorrow. Evelyn dated sporadically, but no one compared to Clara. Her heart, it seemed, had been left on that rainy highway. Still, she pushed forward, her ambition a shield against the loneliness. By 24, she'd built a small but growing reputation as a freelance artist, her work featured in local galleries. Yet, every accolade felt hollow without Clara to share it with. One evening, scrolling through social media, Evelyn froze. A mutual friend from Willow Creek had posted a photo of Clara at a college event, her smile as radiant as ever. Evelyn's heart raced. She was alive, she was okay. But the caption mentioned Clara's engagement to a man named David. The words hit Evelyn like a punch, stealing her breath. Had Clara chosen a different life? Was she hiding who she was to please her family? Evelyn didn't know, but the pain was unbearable. She closed her laptop, tears streaming down her face, and vowed to move on. But moving on was easier said than done. Evelyn threw herself into her work, taking on bigger clients, her art becoming bolder, more raw. She channeled her heartbreak into every stroke, her pieces resonating with others who'd felt cast aside. Her latest project, a series called Exile, was gaining attention, with a gallery in New York expressing interest. Evelyn was on the cusp of something big, but the ache for Clara never faded. In Michigan, Clara's engagement to David was a lie she lived for her parents' sake. He was kind, a friend who knew her truth and offered to be her cover. "You don't have to do this alone," he'd said, and Clara, desperate to keep her family's approval, agreed. But every time she looked at him, she saw Evelyn's face. She hadn't stopped loving her, not for a second. Late at night, she'd search online for Evelyn's name, hoping for a trace of her. One day, she stumbled across an article about Exile, featuring Evelyn's name and a photo of her at a gallery opening. Clara's heart stopped. Evelyn was thriving, but she looked different, stronger, sharper, her eyes carrying a weight Clara didn't recognize. Clara knew she couldn't keep living a lie. She broke off the engagement, facing her parents' fury. "You're throwing your life away," her mother shouted, but Clara stood firm. She packed a bag and drove to Columbus, her heart pounding with hope and fear. She didn't know if Evelyn would forgive her for the silence, for the years apart, but she had to try. She had to find the girl she'd never stopped loving, the one she'd let slip away on that rainy night. Evelyn's studio was a sanctuary of chaos, canvases leaning against walls, paint-splattered brushes scattered across a wooden table, and the faint scent of turpentine lingering in the air. She stood before her latest piece, a swirling mass of blues and grays depicting a figure standing alone on a road, rain falling around them. It was her story, her pain, and it was set to be the centerpiece of her Exile exhibition in New York. At 28, Evelyn had carved out a name for herself, but tonight, as she stared at the painting, she felt like that 18-year-old again, abandoned and aching. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. "Evelyn, it's Clara. I'm in Columbus. Can we talk?" Her heart stopped. Clara. After 10 years of silence, her name on the screen felt like a ghost come to life. Evelyn's first instinct was to delete the message, to protect herself from the pain she'd spent years burying. But her fingers hesitated, hovering over the screen. She typed a reply, then deleted it, then typed again. "Meet me at the Bluebird Cafe. 7 p.m. The cafe was a cozy spot in the short north, its walls lined with local art, and its air thick with the scent of roasted coffee. Evelyn arrived early, her nerves fraying as she sipped a latte she barely tasted. She wore her leather jacket, a talisman of the strength she'd built, but inside she was a mess. What did Clara want? Why now? When Clara walked in, time seemed to collapse. She was 27, her blonde hair longer, her face softer but marked by a quiet sorrow. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world fell away. "Ev," Clara whispered, her voice trembling as she sat across from her. "I'm so sorry." Evelyn wanted to be angry, to demand answers for the years of silence, but the sight of Clara's tear-filled eyes softened her resolve. They talked for hours, the cafe emptying around them. Clara explained the pressure from her family, the fake engagement, the fear that had kept her from reaching out. "I never stopped loving you," she said, her hand reaching for Evelyn's. "I was just scared." Evelyn listened, her heart warring between forgiveness and resentment. She told Clara about the highway, the shelter, the years of rebuilding herself. "You could have found me," Evelyn said, her voice breaking. "I waited for you." Clara nodded, tears spilling over. "I know. I failed you. But I'm here now, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." They left the cafe and walked through the city, the autumn air crisp and biting. Columbus was alive with lights, but for Evelyn, the world narrowed to Clara's presence beside her. They stopped at a park, sitting on a bench beneath a canopy of red leaves. Clara reached for Evelyn's hand, and this time, Evelyn didn't pull away. "I'm not the same person I was," Evelyn said softly. "But neither are you. Maybe that's okay." Over the next few weeks, they rebuilt their connection piece by fragile piece. Clara moved to Columbus, taking a job as a librarian, her love for books unchanged. They spent evenings in Evelyn's studio, Clara reading poetry while Evelyn painted. It wasn't perfect, there were arguments, moments when old wounds reopened, but it was real. They were learning each other again, two women no longer bound by the rules of a small town. But the past wasn't done with them. One morning, Evelyn received a letter from Willow Creek. Her mother was ill, terminal cancer, the note said. Her father, now a widower in spirit, had written, "She wants to see you. Please come home." Evelyn stared at the words, her stomach churning. Home. The word felt like a lie. She hadn't spoken to her parents in a decade, hadn't set foot in Willow Creek since that rainy night. The idea of returning filled her with dread, but Clara's hand on her shoulder steadied her. "You don't have to go alone," Clara said. "I'll be with you." Evelyn agreed, but the decision weighed heavily. They drove to Willow Creek, the familiar field stretching out like a memory she tried to erase. The town hadn't changed much, same diner, same church, same suffocating air of judgment. Her parents' house was quieter now, the porch sagging under the weight of time. Her father greeted them at the door, his face lined with grief and something else, regret, maybe. "She's upstairs," he said, his voice softer than Evelyn remembered. Her mother, Helen, lay in bed, frail and pale, a shadow of the woman who'd once cast her out. Evelyn stood frozen, Clara's hand in hers as Helen's eyes met hers. "Evelyn," she whispered, her voice weak. "I was wrong. I'm so sorry." The words hit Evelyn like a wave, threatening to pull her under. She wanted to scream, to demand why it had taken so long, but the sight of her mother's frail form silenced her anger. Instead, she sat beside the bed, listening as Helen spoke of her regrets, her fear, her love twisted by years of rigid belief. Clara stayed by Evelyn's side, a quiet pillar of strength. They spent the day in Willow Creek, navigating the tension of a town that still whispered about them. Some faces were kind, others cold, but Evelyn no longer cared. She'd built a life beyond their judgment, and Clara was part of it. As they left the house, her father pulled her aside. "I didn't understand back then," he said, his voice breaking. "I want to try now." Evelyn nodded, unsure if she could forgive but willing to leave the door open. The drive back to Columbus was quiet, the weight of the day settling over them like dust. Evelyn gripped the wheel, her mind replaying her mother's apology, her father's tentative olive branch. Clara reached over, her hand resting on Evelyn's knee. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Evelyn didn't answer right away, but the warmth of Clara's touch grounded her. "I don't know what I feel," she admitted finally. "But I'm glad you were there." Back in the city, life resumed its rhythm, but the visit to Willow Creek had shifted something in Evelyn. Her art took on a new depth, her exile series evolving into a narrative of reconciliation, not just with her family, but with herself. Clara, too, was finding her place, her job at the library a quiet joy. They'd spend weekends exploring Columbus, discovering hidden bookstores and cozy diners, rebuilding the dreams they'd once shared as teenagers. But the past wasn't so easily left behind. Evelyn's mother passed away a month later. The news came in a phone call from her father, his voice heavy with grief. "The funeral's this weekend," he said. "I'd like you to come." Evelyn hesitated, the invitation pulling her back to a place she'd sworn never to return. Clara, sensing her turmoil, offered to go with her again. "We'll face it together," she said, and Evelyn nodded, grateful for the woman who'd become her anchor. The funeral was a tense affair, the church packed with faces Evelyn hadn't seen in years. Whispers followed her and Clara as they entered, hand in hand, but Evelyn held her head high. She wasn't the scared teenager anymore. She was a woman who'd survived, who'd built a life on her own terms. The service was somber, and Evelyn felt a pang of grief, not for the mother who'd abandoned her, but for the relationship they might have had. Afterward, at the reception, old neighbors approached, some offering condolences, others awkward apologies for their silence years ago. Clara's presence made it bearable. She charmed the room with her warmth, deflecting judgment with grace. When an old classmate made a snide remark about their relationship, Clara didn't flinch. "Love is love," she said simply, her hand squeezing Evelyn's. The words, quiet but firm, silenced the critic, and Evelyn felt a surge of pride. This was the Clara she'd fallen for, the one who faced the world with courage. Back in Columbus, Evelyn's career was soaring. The Exile exhibition opened in New York, drawing crowds and critical praise. Critics called her work raw, unflinching, profoundly human, and Evelyn felt a quiet satisfaction. Clara was there for the opening, beaming with pride as Evelyn spoke to the audience about the pain and hope woven into her art. That night, in a quiet corner of the gallery, Clara pulled Evelyn close. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, and Evelyn kissed her, the world fading to just the two of them. But life, as always, had more challenges in store. Clara's parents, who'd been distant since her move to Columbus, reached out unexpectedly. They wanted to meet, to talk things over. Clara was torn. She loved her parents, but their conditional acceptance of her had left scars. Evelyn encouraged her to go, to face them as she'd faced her own family. "You're stronger than you think," Evelyn told her, echoing the words Clara had once said to her. The meeting was fraught, Clara's parents struggling to reconcile their beliefs with their love for their daughter. They didn't fully understand, but they listened. A small step, but a step nonetheless. Clara returned to Columbus emotionally drained but hopeful. "They're trying," she told Evelyn, and for the first time, she felt like she could breathe in their presence. Evelyn and Clara's relationship deepened, their love a quiet rebellion against the world that had tried to tear them apart. They moved in together, a small apartment filled with books, art, and the promise of a shared future. Evelyn's paintings adorned the walls, and Clara's laughter filled the rooms. They were building something new, something theirs, but the shadow of their past lingered, a reminder of how fragile happiness could be. The apartment was their haven, a space where Evelyn and Clara could be themselves without fear. Mornings were spent sipping coffee on the balcony, evenings tangled in each other's arms, sharing stories of their day. Evelyn's art continued to gain recognition, with galleries across the country requesting her work. Clara, meanwhile, was promoted at the library, her passion for literature inspiring those around her. They were happy, but happiness, they'd learned, was never guaranteed. One evening, as they cooked dinner together, Clara's phone rang. It was her brother, his voice urgent. "Dad had a heart attack," he said. "He's in the hospital. He's asking for you." Clara's face paled and Evelyn dropped the spatula, pulling her into a hug. "We'll go together," Evelyn said, and Clara nodded, her eyes filled with fear. The drive to Michigan was long, the silence heavy with unspoken worries. At the hospital, Clara's father, Robert, was stable but weak. He looked at Clara with a mix of love and regret, his hand trembling as he reached for hers. "I haven't been fair to you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to know you really know you." Clara cried, the weight of years of distance lifting slightly. Evelyn stood by her side, a quiet support, as Clara and her father began to mend their fractured bond. The visit stirred something in Evelyn. She'd been avoiding her own father since her mother's funeral, unsure if she could trust his change of heart. But Clara's courage inspired her. She called him, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Can we talk?" she asked, and he agreed, his tone cautious but warm. They met in Columbus, at the same cafe where she'd reunited with Clara. Her father, George, looked older, his eyes carrying a weariness she hadn't noticed before. "I was wrong," he said, his hands clasped tightly around his coffee mug. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was just afraid of what I didn't understand." Evelyn listened, her heart torn between pain and hope. She told him about her life, her art, her love for Clara. George nodded, absorbing her words. "I'd like to be part of your life," he said finally. "If you'll let me." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As the months passed, Evelyn and Clara faced new challenges. The art world was demanding and Evelyn's schedule grew hectic, pulling her away from Clara at times. Clara, meanwhile, struggled with the emotional toll of reconnecting with her family. There were moments of doubt, arguments born of exhaustion and fear, but they always found their way back to each other. Their love was a choice, one they made every day, through the mess and the beauty of it all. One spring evening, Evelyn surprised Clara with a picnic in the park where they'd reconnected. Under the same canopy of leaves, now vibrant green, Evelyn took Clara's hand. "I don't want to lose you again," she said, her voice trembling. She pulled out a small ring, simple but meaningful, and Clara's eyes widened. "Marry me," Evelyn said, and Clara laughed through her tears, nodding before pulling Evelyn into a kiss. The proposal marked a new chapter, one filled with plans for a future they'd once thought impossible. They began organizing a small wedding, inviting only those who'd supported them, friends, a few family members who'd come around, and the community they'd built in Columbus. Evelyn's father offered to walk her down the aisle, a gesture that brought tears to her eyes. Clara's parents, still grappling with their beliefs, agreed to attend, a fragile step toward acceptance. But life, as always, had one more curve to throw. Just weeks before the wedding, Evelyn received a call from a lawyer in Willow Creek. Her father had been in an accidental car crash on the same stretch of Route 23 where she'd been abandoned years ago. He was alive but critical, and the news sent Evelyn spiraling. Clara held her as she cried, the irony of the location cutting deep. They drove to Willow Creek, the familiar road a haunting echo of the past. The hospital in Willow Creek was small, its sterile halls a stark contrast to the vibrant life Evelyn and Clara had built. George lay in the ICU, tubes and monitors surrounding him, his face bruised but peaceful. Evelyn sat by his side, her hand gripping his, the weight of their fractured history heavy in the air. Clara stood behind her, a steady presence, her hand resting on Evelyn's shoulder. "He's strong," Clara whispered, and Evelyn nodded, clinging to the hope. Days passed, and George's condition stabilized. He woke, his voice weak but clear, and when he saw Evelyn he smiled. "I'm sorry," he said, the words a refrain from their last meeting. "I'm proud of you," Evelyn cried, the anger she'd held for so long dissolving into something softer. She told him about the wedding, about Clara, about the life they were building. George listened, his eyes bright with tears. "I want to be there," he said, and Evelyn promised he would. The wedding was a month later, a small ceremony in a Columbus park, surrounded by wildflowers and the people who mattered most. Evelyn wore a simple white dress, her hair loose, a contrast to the leather jacket she'd once used as armor. Clara was radiant in a flowing gown, her blonde hair catching the sunlight. George, still recovering, sat in the front row, his smile a quiet victory. Clara's parents were there too, their presence a tentative bridge to a better future. As they exchanged vows, Evelyn's voice trembled with emotion. "You were my home when I had none," she said to Clara. "You're my forever." Clara's vows were just as heartfelt, promising to stand by Evelyn through every storm. They kissed, the crowd cheering, and for the first time, Evelyn felt whole, not because the world had changed, but because she and Clara had changed it for themselves. Years later, Evelyn's art continued to inspire, her Exile series a testament to resilience and love. She and Clara built a life filled with laughter, art, and the quiet joy of ordinary moments. They adopted a dog, a scruffy mutt they named Hope, and their apartment became a gathering place for friends and chosen family. George became a regular visitor, his relationship with Evelyn growing stronger with each conversation. Clara's parents, too, softened over time, their love for their daughter outweighing their doubts. The road that had once torn Evelyn and Clara apart became a symbol of their strength. They'd been left on the side of it, cast out for who they were, but they'd found their way back to each other. Their love was a defiance of the world's cruelty, a beacon for others who felt lost. And when they stood together, hand in hand, they knew they'd never be abandoned again, not by each other, not by the life they'd fought so hard to build. In the end, it wasn't just about surviving the pain. It was about thriving beyond it, about creating a love so fierce it could heal the deepest wounds. Evelyn and Clara had been left on the side of the road, but they'd walked it together step by step, until they found their way home. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.